CNN's Manu Raju is reporting that Matt Gaetz, perhaps the leader of the rebels, the most virulent anti-Kevin congressman, walking off the floor of the House, acknowledged McCarthy will likely become Speaker. Although he said, we basically, he'll likely win, but we fitted him in a nice straitjacket.
What a way to start to govern. Look, I think to your point, there are more of these members who are like Congressman Stewart. They do not know what was given away.
Exactly.
But when we all sat down together the first time a year ago, whenever that was, I think the word I used was ugly. This is an ugly way to get to be Speaker. And I think we've seen that this week, but I think it's also going to be an ugly way to continue to be Speaker.
It is an ugly way, and Kevin McCarthy, he said it after he came out of there that he has the votes. He said he has the votes. He said he can count. Well, that's the big test. That's the big test. Can he count? Is that the lesson he learned? Because to go back in time a little bit, his initial strategery misunderestimated the opposition by a lot. By a lot. You do not take something to the floor when you are going to lose on 14 ballots. You just don't.
Right.
You negotiate beforehand. So let's see if he's learned that lesson. I want to come back to those interviews you mentioned, though, because I think that's actually the fascinating part going forward. This is just about personnel. Who leads us? Now we have to deal with a whole host of very hard issues, a narrow majority in a divided government with a Democratic president and a Democratic Senate, whether it's Ukraine spending, whether it's raising the debt limit, there will be more, immigration issues and more. The governing conservatives, French Hill, Chris Stewart, Fitzpatrick on earlier, they want to try to govern. They're willing to talk to Democrats. The question is, after this hostage crisis of the last 4 days, do they have any more room to do that? Do they have less room to do that? Is everybody bruised enough to say, let's stop fighting and give this a chance? You can see it. We've talked a lot about the rebels and the holdouts and how they're anti-government, how they're anti-establishment, anti-system, anti-democracy in some ways, realizing they're outnumbered. The governing conservatives like French Hill, you had David Joyce on the other day, Congressman Stewart right there. They're thoughtful people. They're polite. Democrats at home are saying we disagree with them. I get it. Chris Stewart just gave credit to Nancy Pelosi. How did she figure this out with a narrow majority? There are a lot of thoughtful Republicans. There are a lot of thoughtful policy-based Republicans who understand the predicament of divided government with a tiny majority, who still want to do some things. Can they?
Well, we still don't fully know what happened
Right.
behind closed doors and what the concessions are. We don't have a final list. We knew what it looked like yesterday. We talked about how much it diminished the power that Kevin McCarthy will have if what he is saying does become true tonight. We still don't know what that's going to look like. And, I'm still curious which members it is that he believes are going to cross the line, because Eli Crane and Matt Rosendale, the two we're speaking of, I'm told are in the top 3 of the most opposed to Kevin McCarthy. So what is he giving them? What is it going to look like? Because when we've been on the Hill this week speaking with people who are even McCarthy supporters, they've said he'll still be an effective speaker, but he's certainly not going to be powerful. They wanted the power to be returned to the members. That is really what a lot of them agreed on when they looked at this. And so a lot of these people, Abby was saying earlier, a lot of them are new members. A lot of them, even if they're not new members, have never been in the majority before. They don't even know what that looks like. And so that will also be, this whole new world for them, of where this is the easiest vote that they're supposed to be taking.
Yep.
Look how long it's taken.
And can I play devil's advocate a little bit about how this played out? Because there is some psychology in the Republican conference about voting against Kevin McCarthy. And I think there were some people who needed to cast a vote against Kevin McCarthy to be able to go the other way, or in the case of some of the 6 who are remaining, some might need to vote present. Some might never be able to cast a vote for Kevin McCarthy. So if you're McCarthy, you probably know that about some of your members, that you have to get to the votes, you have to go through this exercise, as painful as it was. I'm just saying, I don't think Nancy Pelosi would have ever gotten to this point, but I also think he's dealing with a different crop of people.
Let me bring up one issue, because we still don't know what the concessions are, right? In the 1970s, after all these CIA excesses, there was this thing called the Church Committee, and they looked into CIA excesses and put some guidelines and restrictions in place. There is a desire among the Freedom Caucus folks and the rebels to have a church-style committee looking at the FBI and the Department of Justice. The big fear among establishment Republicans is that this is not going to be the Church Committee. This is going to be an effort by individuals who have defied congressional subpoenas during the January 6th investigation to actually obstruct justice from the with a gavel in their hands, from a committee. I mean, there are real fears here.
So let's talk about one of them, Scott Perry, whose phone was taken by the FBI. We have a number of people, by the way, including Kevin McCarthy, who it appears is about to become Speaker, who defied the subpoena. Yeah. The other group that I hear about is there are supposedly still Republican defense hawks, Republicans who care about national security. They may have given up a lot of money.
$75 billion.
$75 billion in defense spending. How do they live with that?
Although the thing with that, I will say, is that it's not entirely up to them. Right. I mean, funding our Defense Department is a whole of government enterprise that also involves Republicans in a Senate that is still not quite as far gone as the House of Representatives. So I do think there are some questions about, we'll see if these hardliners really actually won concessions that they think they did.
I also think it bears repeating that today is January 6th, and we watched earlier the president have that ceremony where he gave honors to people who defended democracy. And maybe by the end of the day on January 6th, Kevin McCarthy will be Speaker, but it was 2 years ago that some of these holdouts helped stage a coup, a violent coup.
And if
that almost took down this country.
If he becomes Speaker on the anniversary of the January 6th insurrection, I just don't think we should let that go.
Coming back late at night to finish their business 2 years later.
Right. Yeah. Can I just go back to the defense thing for 1 second, because I actually want to give the rebels credit for this, which is, I think it was Senator Fred Thompson who once said, nobody who has ever been to the Pentagon thinks that they couldn't have some of their budget cut. And
have you not seen the West Wing episode where they throw the ashtray at the wall? Or am I now making a reference for your head?
So the idea that they actually want to cut defense spending, which is really actually, in their view, I'm talking about the view of the rebels, cutting money going to defense contractors, cutting money going to fund what Eisenhower warned of was the military-industrial complex, that actually is consistent with actual wanting to drain the swamp. It is. And in general, Republicans and Democrats have been reluctant to touch that budget, especially Republicans, and I give them credit for that.
Call me skeptical that this one sticks for a couple of reasons. First of all, Democrats would love what you are describing. They have been asking for that for a long time.
I don't think would love most of these rule changes.
I think those rules, that particular one, I think Democrats would be all for it. But this is happening at the same time that Republicans in both chambers are trying to make the argument that Biden and Democrats are too soft on China. Biden and Democrats are not willing to fund the military enough. I just do not think, to Casey's point, and as I've said before, McCarthy is giving away things that he doesn't have the power to give away. He's basically just saying to them, this is going to be our starting negotiating position. And if you are on the other side of the aisle, whether you're a Democrat or you're a moderate Republican, all that says to you is that this is where they're going to start. And we're just not going to do that. And we're just going to divide and conquer and move forward with another plan. I think it just shows McCarthy's weakness. It shows his hand. And I don't think it's going to be that hard for a lot of Republicans in the House or the Senate to just steamroll right over.
Yeah, and Jake, I will say on the defense question, I think I take your point about the defense contractors and overspending, et cetera. I think this is actually more about the kind of isolationist strain we've seen in the populist Republican Party than it is about anything else.
You don't think it's about the swamp? You think it's like we don't need a big military because we don't need to be overseas?
I think right. I think it has more to do with the fact that there are a lot of Trump supporters in the populist wing of the GOP who just want, and this has been a strain in American, public life for over a century, right? It's just get us out of there. We don't want to be involved, kind of the Rand Pauls of the world. So I think that's a little bit of what it is, and that's a huge ideological divide inside the Republican Party. I mean, there is still a very strong hawk wing in the Republican Party, and that's why I think people have focused on this as something that McCarthy may have seemed to have given away and angered a significant, important chunk of people who have been supporting him so far.
Could I ask Caitlin? We have not said the T word today.
I'm
Donald
sitting
Trump.
here thinking, should I bring it up? Because
Go.
you know that if this goes according to Kevin McCarthy's plan tonight, and he does ultimately become House Speaker in a few hours, Trump will come in and take credit. I don't think that would surprise any person on this panel. It is worth noting, we said earlier Trump was calling some of these holdouts this morning. I imagine he's probably still on the phone with some of them now. he's not the reason their votes were changed. It was these
Such an
backdoor
important point.
negotiations, and we're going to ask, what were the concessions? What does it actually look like when we find out once this is passed? Trump did not have the influence here that he sought to have, because if he had, what's happening today would have happened on Tuesday, and it didn't. It took much longer, and so I do think that's part of this. Trump is still a factor in this, of course. He didn't have the influence on this. I'm not saying his influence overall is diminished. I don't think it is. But in this, we did see how much that changed.